Hello, everybody. Here we are. We're back on ManTalk to talk about another clip. We're going to play a Jordan Peterson little bit thing. He talks about the unconscious. But before we do that, introduce myself. I'm Todd Hayen, a registered psychotherapist in Toronto. And my email address is right below my name there. If anybody wants to get in touch with me to ask me about what we're doing here or whatever else. And before we go on with the clip, this is William, who's sitting in another place, but it looks like he's right here, but he isn't. William, what do you have to say?
Good to be here. William MP, existential counselor in Toronto. Also, I think my my website is down below, so you can reach out to me there.
Yeah, actually, it's my website too. Yeah. It's not my email address. Sorry about that. Anyhow, we can pop on email addresses here. If this is mine, okay, and here is, if you want to write that down real fast, here's William's. His is more complicated. But anyway, that's that. And here's the little clip I'll play, and we'll get to talking about it in a second. Here we go.
It was Freud who really popularized the idea of the unconscious mind. And we take this for granted to such a degree today that we don't understand how revolutionary the idea was. Like with what's happened with Freud is that we've taken all the marrow out of his bones, so to speak, and left the husk behind. And you know, now when we think about Freud, we just think about the husk because that's everything that's been discarded. But so much of what he discovered is part of our popular conception now, including the idea that your perceptions and your actions and your thoughts are all what would you say, informed and shaped by unconscious motivations that are not part of your voluntary control. And that's a very, very strange thing. It's one of the most unsettling things about the psychoanalytic theories, because the psychoanalytic theories are something like, you're a loose collection of living sub-personalities, each with its own set of motivations and perceptions and emotions and rationales, all of that. And you have limited control over that. So you're like a plurality of internal personalities that's loosely linked into a unity. You know that because you can't control yourself very well.
I'm going to start doing this when
you can't control yourself very well.
Yeah, right. I'm going to start using my hands like Jordan does. A big topic. Yeah. I'd like to know what the husk is he's talking about Freud. What do you think he means when he says that we've taken Freud and we've essentially turning him into the husk and it's just the crap part of him. What is the crap part of Freud, just to start?
Yeah, no, I think he's referring to the fact that, like, most people think of Freud, they think of shit that he got wrong, not what he got right. And you know what he got wrong. Good question. I mean, I think people don't like the theories of like penis envy, this kind of thing. Just that it's like this concept that there's like there's a hedonistic kind of drive in the human unconscious that's sort of fixated on sex. That is kind of what I guess people would have done away with, this idea that we're that motivated by, I don't know, what I would call like a hedonistic kind of sexual preoccupation. Does that sound like what you think of?
Yeah. I when I was in school, of course, I went to a depth psychological school that focuses on both Jung and Freud. Most of the people there, the women did not care much for Freud.
Right.
And we had one of our primary teachers was a Freudian psychoanalyst, and she was amazing, and she was a woman, and she said that a lot of the misunderstanding of Freud really came from his translations of his writing, because he wrote in German, which I thought was quite interesting, although there's been a lot of translators for Freud over time. Right. But it's what you're saying. But you know, I've never thought of what Freud had to say as being stupid. There really isn't anything that I think Freud had to say that doesn't have some kind of merit in it. Considering the time he was working and writing, obviously there's going to be an influence of that period of time of understanding certain personalities, certain psychological issues, with hysteria and feminine whatever. But I was just curious that I would love to hear what Peterson says about the husk, because it probably is just what she said. I mean, that's more of a popular approach to it, but Freud's work in dreams and what he's saying here with the unconscious, I mean, is pretty unbelievable what he formulated and what he came up with. And by the way, to those of you listening, the recent movie with I can't remember both of the actors' names now. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it's about Freud and a visit. Oh, it's Freud being visited by C.S. Lewis, I believe. And the movie, I think, has it doesn't even come close, in my opinion, to what probably happened between the two of them, if they even ever met. I don't know if they did, but anyhow, that's just something to throw in there. I don't know. Have you seen that film, William?
Don't think so, no.
Oh, it's pretty recent. Check it out. I'd love to hear what you think of it, because I thought it sucked big time. So,
well, yeah. With that endorsement, I'll be sure to spend 2 hours of my life. It's funny too. Like, it kind of strikes me as like, why the fuck do we even talk about what he got wrong? Like, what are we doing? It's like,
yeah, right.
There's a thing now where everyone loves to sort of get fixated on these kind of things. It's like, well, why don't we just focus on like what's actually functional in what he says? And like, I mean, I don't really care who said what. I mean, I'm radical pragmatist. Like, if it works, I like it. Who cares who said it? Well,
I feel that way about quite a few things, and you do too, probably. Yeah. I mean, there's so many people that get, like Jordan, for instance. I mean, he's been completely raked through the coals because of certain things that he has said. And it's like, okay, well, if he said something you don't like or don't think is right, then just put that to the side and look at the things that he does say that you can agree with. I mean, you don't have to wipe him out entirely because of one particular idea he has. Obviously, he's going to get some things not necessarily wrong, but certainly different than what you might think.
Yeah, it's a strange thing that we do. Not to get sidetracked, but like, I watched JD Vance on Joe Rogan, and then I watched what the left was sort of, upset. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, like, 3 hour long interview with him, and Hassan Piker, this YouTube guy, he jumps on it, and he picks up on this thing about he claims that they're being Islamophobic, because they're talking about I think it was in Michigan somewhere, they now have the call to prayer.
Right.
Out, and they're worrying about the influx of Islam and the way that it's happening in UK. So they're like, about everything that's being said, they kind of drill down on this one little thing and he literally in this YouTube video is screaming and kind of pulling his hair out to sort of signal to everybody that's listening, this is how you're supposed to be reacting to this. Oh, that's Islamophobic, and it just strikes me as kind of like, I think he's got a point. It's worth discussing, because the really what he was pointing to was JD Vance and Joe Rogan talking about their fears of Islam, which could fall into the category of Islamophobia. But the way that we do that, the way that we just keep focusing on what people got wrong and the one little slip of the tongue and the one little thing that was offensive, and everything else is completely ignored.
Well, I think obviously this is political, what you're talking about.
Sure.
Politics have always tried to do that. The problem is not so much that they do it. The problem is that people buy it, and they fall into being so easily manipulated by these kinds of distractions, essentially, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
Is the scary part. If people didn't fall for it so easily, they probably would not do it as much. All right, or they would do it differently. But it's just gotten to a point where, just like what you're saying, it's like you can say anything, and if it's something you can put a negative spin on, then you put a negative spin on it, and that becomes the focus, as opposed to the positive spin. But anyway,
that's Freud's whole point, right?
Right. Well, yeah, obviously that's a good segue into the talk is this idea of the unconscious and the power that the unconscious has. I don't know what your experience is with your clients. Most of my clients have heard of the unconscious. I mean, most of them say subconscious, but they've heard of the unconscious, but they don't readily believe in what it can do. And I think Jung is famous for a quote where he says, we don't know what the unconscious is doing or how it's doing it because it's unconscious. That's like it's in its own definition. It's not something you are going to know, and you're not going to be able to identify it. Oh yeah, I know what that is. That's my unconscious. Because if you know it's unconscious, it's not unconscious anymore. It's become conscious. Right. And anyway, a lot more to say about that, but you go on with a thought here.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the core of the humanistic approach of psychotherapy is really grounded in the concept of just reflective listening. You talk, I listen, I reflect back what I hear. And in doing that, you see, hopefully, some blind spots that you wouldn't otherwise see. And sure, that's not the same as doing depth work, but it starts to scratch the surface of, oh, there are things about me in the way that I present myself and what I choose to say and focus on and whatnot that I'm blind to. And another person can bear witness. And if they're a clear channel, they can reflect it back in a way that it can show me something that I'm missing. And in those blind spots usually lies something essential to, the riddle that you're stuck in, which brings you into therapy in the first place.
That's a good way to put it. I see most issues that people come in with as a process of an unconscious complex, like a system that resides in the unconscious. That's not just a thing. It's not like an image or a thought, but it's actually a system. It's actually a mode of behavior. That the complex constitutes, and the complex is unconscious, generally, in my view, formed in childhood or formed through trauma. May not be childhood, but because it's unconscious, it generally gets there through a traumatic process, or just generally. I mean, not certainly there are outliers to that idea. And doing the reflective listening, like you're saying, is a passage into the unconscious in order to retrieve that information or those images or whatever it might be that's stored there. And by doing so, then the psyche has an opportunity to regulate it, to actually have access to it. I always use the analogy of an abscess, like in the medical world, needs to be lanced because it's surrounded by protective tissue that doesn't allow the poison that's within it to be worked on by the immune system.
Yeah, good metaphor. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, people get it to some degree. I mean, it's a really difficult thing to describe or to explain. I don't know if I'm capable of it, of describing it and explaining what impact it has, the unconscious on an individual. I mean, there are obvious things like your heart beats unconsciously but that's not really what we're talking about. It's more of a cycle. Yeah. Right. That's a different kind of part of the unconscious. Yeah.
I mean, because I very easily get pulled back into the complexity of things. I always like to anchor myself in really simple questions, and clinically, the one that I always come back to is, how are you getting in your own way? That seems to me to be like we can talk about a lot. We can talk about what you're feeling. We can talk about other people and what maybe is motivating them. We can talk about dynamics. But really where I come in is usually, how are you getting in your own way? And usually you can't see how you're getting in your own way. So I see, I bear witness and see if I can sort of reflect something back to you in a way that makes sense, that can kind of unlock or loosen the grip on the riddle that we're stuck in. And then that loosening feels like, in the lancing of the boil, then there you get into the catharsis of it, where you can actually release some of the
right
feelings, whether it be tears or rage or insight, whatever it might be. And that seems to be the sort of maybe the fundamental mechanism of psychotherapeutic intervention. And then you can add everything on top of it, everything, and or not add it, where like anything else would be a kind of would just be another tool in the box. But if you look at like Rollo May, he said the greatest thing. He's like, I think what he said was, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, so don't fucking hate me, but you talk and I listen is the basic thing here, human to human interaction, and everything else is just a hack. It's just a kind of well, sure, if you use it if you need to, but it's just a trick.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shortcut or whatever. But really, the fundamental thing, and you can imagine with Rollo May, it's like he's really into the long-term psychodynamic thing where it's like years and years of someone bearing witness to your story with very little intervention. And at least that's what I imagine based on what he says. And I like that. I mean, I think obviously we all do rely on these kind of hacks or tricks or shortcuts that he's describing. But yeah, that's the fundamental thing that's at play is, you speak and I bear witness.
Well, where does that fit into the idea of the revelation of the unconscious? Like, what is the purpose in revealing the unconscious systems in order to find out what's getting in your way, say, as an example? Like what does that, is it more information? Is it becoming more aware of the process? Like when you get in your own way, generally you don't think you are. You don't consciously think that you're taking behavior or you're taking action that's going to get you in trouble. And very often you're if you're at least the least bit insightful, some people are not at all. I understand that. They think everything they do is right on, even though they end up in a lot of trouble as a result of it. But the people that actually come to therapy usually like, oh, what am I doing? Why did I do that in that relationship? Why was that? And I think it's important to note that the unconscious system that gets in your way doesn't think it's getting in your way. It thinks it's helping you. It thinks it's got the right idea. I know what to do here generally to protect you. I mean, that's its usually prime objective is safety, is emotional safety. And generally it doesn't understand what that is. It's an immature system that doesn't really know what's best for you. It's like mother telling you to put on your coat when it's not very cold out. But when you don't want to because you want to go out and play and you don't want to be cumbered by your big coat. So that's best for you to not wear a coat, but your mother thinks it's better for you to wear the coat.
Right.
Now, obviously those are both conscious things going on, but it's similar to that.
The way that I say it is like, these defenses are hastily conceived in a desperate situation by a little child.
Right. Exactly.
Pushed to the limit when you were young, and you had very little access to ways to defend yourself.
Exactly.
And then another thing that I like to say too is that your solution has become the problem.
And that's generally how it happens.
Right. So okay, I'm overwhelmed. It's too much. I dissociate. I check out.
Yeah. Right.
I'm not really here. My parents are fighting, or there's something happening in the background, but I'm tuned out. I'm in my head. And it's great because then you avoid the emotional charge of the fear of parents fighting, whatever it is that you're feeling, grief, but then what happens is that you keep going back and relying on that over and over again. That the trauma is naturally overprotective. Right? It's like there's always a kind of deal of, I don't want this to ever happen again. Let me do whatever I possibly can to avoid feeling this feeling or being in this feeling of loss of control. And so then if you can sort of trace it back, it's like whatever is getting in your way now is usually something that was necessary to keep you safe in the past. And if you can go back and connect the dots and recognize that why you needed it back then to keep you safe, but that you don't need it now.
Exactly.
Unlock.
Yeah, exactly. Now the thing that I would add to that, and of course you would have said this, is that you gave one example of like hearing the parents fight and feeling you don't have control over that and it's unsafe. So one option would be create a complex that retreats. And that complex says hide from this kind of conflict. Don't get engaged in it. Literally when you're a kid, maybe hide under the bed or in the closet. But when you become an adult, you don't confront conflictual situations, where then you could also have, for the same stimulus, the same experience, you could create a complex that fights rather than runs. that actually creates anger and creates violence, maybe even, but certainly anger and screaming back, tantrums or whatever it might be, going in your room and throwing your toys around when your parents are fighting, whatever that might be. And then, of course, when you become an adult, that becomes the response to the trigger of conflict. And so, you know, what I see, and tell me if you see something different, because I think this would be interesting to know. I see that very often to the stimulus of the trigger of danger and of threat as a child creates a complex that could be one extreme or the other, that it's either fight or flight. You know, it's usually, you know, you can have somebody who's sexually molested, and when they become an adult, they become very promiscuous, or they become somebody that's the opposite of that is terrified of any kind of sexual encounter. It seems that way in my observation, that it's common for a complex to be formed from the same stimulus in completely opposite ways. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, sure. The fawning response. I mean, that's, you know, fight or flight are the two most obvious ones, but there's others. There's freeze,
oh yeah.
On, you know,
right.
Even the I've heard it once put that, like, the fawning taken to the ultimate extreme is like, fuck, you can fuck your way out of trouble. You know.
Now, what is fawning? What do you mean by that?
Well, fawning is that, like, okay, so if I'm under threat from somebody, maybe I can bat my eyelashes and play coy and play cute and kind of seduce them into believing that they need me around so that they don't reject me or hurt me. Right. Fawning response probably is most recognizable in people pleasers. People pleasers are kind of stuck in a chronic fawning response with people around them because, you know, they leaned on that when they were young. It's a very common one too. I mean, anytime a kid sticks out his bottom lip and kind of pouts and makes the doe eyes, it's a fawning response. I mean,
right. Okay. I just wanted you to define that for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. And people may also be confused too, because there's trauma responses.
Yeah.
There's complexes, and then there's defenses, and they can become a little confusing. So like a trauma response is like how the trauma is working to protect you in the moment. The defense is continuing to rely on some version of that, right? So for example, a freeze response would be dissociation, right? And so the defense is anytime I'm overwhelmed, I flip into dissociation, right? And so that's the defense based on the trauma. Complex is a little bit different, right? I mean, complex is then we're looking into the archetypal realms, where it's like if you have something that goes wrong with your relationship to maternal figures, then the space in your psyche where, you know, the mother archetype normally would be is complicated, like fucked up. And in deep complexes, it's like totally fucked up, you know, in a way that will like flip it on its head in a way. Right?
Yeah, right. Well, this stuff obviously can be relatively simple, or it can be phenomenally complicated. We don't, as therapists and as clients, you don't actually have to figure it out, but you have to talk about it. You have to act as if you have to go through the process of thinking that you're trying to figure it out in order to converse about it, in order to make it something. So, you know, anyone out there that's contemplating going into therapy, this is a talk therapy, at least psychodynamic or archetypal or whatever. Your primary activity is going to be talking about your experiences, whether they're present or things from the past, in order to allow the mind to access the unconscious as often as you can make it do that. Because when it accesses it, you actually create a conduit into the unconscious. Doesn't matter really where in it. Like dream work is like that. It's like dream work accesses the unconscious, but it doesn't necessarily, it can, but it doesn't necessarily access the part of the unconscious that's causing the problem. You know, it just doesn't really matter as long as it gets into the unconscious. Because then, this again, in my theory, the it's not my theory, but what I generally adhere to is that the psyche then has the opportunity to access the unconscious. That's what journaling does. Even meditation does that to a degree. And if it has access to it, it can actually regulate it because it knows how to do that. I think that's something that's important. I'd like to hear what you think about that. I think there's an assumption in the kind of work that we typically do that there really isn't pathologizing. There is a belief that the psyche is capable of regulating just about anything if it's given the opportunity to do it and has the resources it needs. So if somebody comes in, you don't necessarily label them as having some kind of pathological disease of the mind. It's more that they've been blocked, or like you said a minute ago, what's getting in their way. It's like the analogy of a log jam of something that's just keeping the natural system. And this is very much the same in physical naturopathy, or not so much dealing with the disease or dealing with the pathology, but dealing with giving the body the opportunity and the resources to self-heal. And I think we do the same thing. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. To what extent do you work somatically? Do you find that you...
I don't at all. I really admire people that do, and I know you do.
I do.
The most somatic thing that I do is sand tray work. It isn't somatic, but at least you're moving figures around. You're like using your body to stand up in the room. But that's about it. But I think that's a hugely important part of this work, and I just don't do it.
Yeah.
And
well, the intervention, I mean, it's pretty simple. What are you feeling right now? And then self-medication comes in, and then the next step is, let's say that the person says, I don't know. Okay, then I put up a chart, and they pick out. They go, yeah, you know what I'm feeling? Oh, that's like, no, it's not fear. It's dread. That's what it is. It's dread. Oh, good. Here's the question. How is your body telling you that you're feeling that?
Yeah, that's good. I do a little bit of that. I can't say I don't do that at all, but yeah.
But then it gives you the opportunity to drop the story and stay with the sensation, right? And in that moment, then you drop.
Very important.
Yeah,
right.
You drop the story and stay with the sensation, and then you can explore on a deeper level. My intervention will be something like, what are you feeling? Stick with the physical sensations, and they'll say, oh, well, there's this is burning in my solar plexus, this kind of acidic kind of grinding. Oh, interesting. Okay, so is that familiar to you? What do you associate that with? When have you felt that before? And then you can start to move back. And if you get lucky, sometimes it's like immediate. Oh, I know this feeling.
Yeah, right.
That person made me feel when that was happening. Okay, and then we come back into the story and see if we can connect some of the dots.
Yeah, and
though, there's a lot of like sort of orthodoxy on two sides. There's the kind of like, the people that think, oh, somatics is not is essential, and that really you can talk your way through this stuff. And then you get these somatic people now, very dogmatic, saying that like you can't talk your way out of trauma, and you're foolish, and you'll never get anywhere with all that shit, which doesn't play. It's not true. Because I've seen even if you don't use any somatic interventions, people can loosen their grip on this shit just by talking through it.
Oh no, I agree. I've seen that. Yeah,
pulling back.
I do a bit of that, and I'm sure you do too. Not so much the feeling in the body, the somatic, but imagery. Hillman always said, "Stick with the image." Totally. It's like the idea of what image does that bring up.
Totally.
And certainly in dream work a lot with images, and in other areas too. If you do any art therapy or anything like that, there's images, obviously. And in sand tray, I do a lot of sand tray work. And in sand tray work, there's obviously the image of the characters and how they're placed in the tray. So imagery is something that I do quite a bit of focus on, which is similar to what you're saying, but it's do you do any sand tray work?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Every session, I like to close, not every session, but almost every session, I like to close with pulling a card. Usually it's a tarot card or an oracle.
Oh card. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do that too.
And then I say, the first thing I say is just stick with the image.
Yeah. Right.
And sometimes it's obvious, especially if people know, like a lot of my clients will know, they're familiar enough with the tarot that certain cards automatically they sort of get the meaning. They'll often sort of say, oh, I don't know what that card means, and I say, oh, it's okay, just stick with the image, and read like a crystal ball. But essentially, you're asking them to project onto that and see what they can find. It can vary. For some people, you can, I mean, my favorite thing in that intervention is that we just stick to the image and the person will kind of pull something out of what they see. And we don't go anywhere near what the book says about the card or how that card is classically interpreted, right? It's just the image draws something out of them. But, you know, if it doesn't, you still have that understanding to fall back on and the concepts in it. And my question is always like, if this card is trying to communicate something to you, let's just take that for cash, that it's got a message for you about what we were just talking about. If that were true, what would it be? And then that bypasses a lot of the kind of the questioning, the inner critic that wants to sort of go, oh, this is bullshit. And you go, sure, if it wasn't bullshit.
Yeah.
You know?
Let me throw something in there just to kind of put a little bit more definition on these things.
Right.
What you're saying, that one of the most powerful things about using tarot is that the images are generally, certainly the original ones, the Marseille and the Rider pack. They're the ones that most people know, that they've seen in movies and whatever. Those images,
give credit where it's due. I call it the Pamela Smith deck.
Oh, right. Okay.
By Pamela Smith.
Okay. Sorry about that. Which one is that Pamela Smith did?
The Rider-Waite deck.
The Rider-Waite, yeah.
The Rider being the publisher and Waite being the designer, but Pamela Smith being the one who actually drew the imagery. And there's debate about how much, you know, influence he gave, but I mean, ultimately, the credit isn't given to her. So I like to point out to people whenever I can.
Okay. I stand corrected. Sorry about that. Anyhow, those images are pretty archetypal in the sense, and I need to say something before really going on with that that if you have a client that you don't know the images and don't know what they're supposed to mean, you know, by the classic definition, very, very often they will describe what they see from the same archetypal information that the original card was designed around, which is quite fascinating. Yeah. And this brings me to this idea that I think Jung was the primary one to come up with this. I don't know, Freud may have touched on it, of the collective unconscious as opposed to the individual unconscious. But anyway, the unconscious, the collective unconscious, according to Jung at least, is, and correct me if I'm wrong with this or add to this, are certain patterns and images and thoughts and behaviors and whatever that we all share. And it's very similar to instincts. In fact, I think Jung wanted to be able to call them instincts, but they're much more complex than an instinct. Instincts instincts can be complex in their outcome. You know, like you can have a fish that builds some incredible, you know, thing, but the fish doesn't know what it's doing. Only that it's doing what it's programmed to do. So the archetypes don't really work like that. There is a certain part of them that do, that is unconscious, that you don't think about what you're, you know, consciously think about what your behavior is that's being essentially triggered by the archetype. But they can be more complex. The archetypes can be mixed up. There can be all kinds of things like that. But anyhow, the collective unconscious is the unconscious that's shared by all, that there is a symbolic relevance to circles and to mandalas and to, you know, being a mother or being a father or being a warrior or whatever these archetypes are. There is a collective awareness of what those mean among all human beings.
Well, and then there's an awareness, or that there's meaning.
Okay, better word.
Yeah.
Okay, meaning is a better word. Yeah, but I think you have to be aware of something to have meaning to it. But anyhow, whatever. We don't want to.
I think they're meaningless. I think ultimately archetypes are meaningless. And they're value neutral, and they're not only just like, you know, transcultural, but they're trans-species. So, you know, my understanding of things would be that, like, yes, like
well, I'd argue with you on that one.
My archetypal forces when it's constellating the mother archetype.
Well, I can't speak for animals, for other species. So I can't say for sure if animal species also deal with the archetypes the way humans do. That may be unique to our species. It may not be. I mean, they may have their own thing going that's similar.
So if you think of like that there is instinctual forces, energetics that are moving through, they are inflected into patterns. What inflects them into the pattern? That's the archetype, right? So there's this drive in them. There's this instinctual drive toward, like taking care of your young. And what does taking care of you, nurturing and blah, blah, blah. That becomes like contained and directed into, this is mandala, the energy takes that shape. And this is why we say that this is it's trans species, because when you have this libidinal drive that's then it's constellated into this energy, what constellates it is the archetype. And I like the idea too of somebody once gave this great depiction of iron filings on a piece of paper and then a magnet underneath that's like bringing them into formation. And the force that brings them into formation is the libidinal force, and the pattern that it makes is the archetype. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, this is a place that I think all of us could argue. And Jung even argued about it, because I think he went through his whole life changing his mind about what an archetype actually was. My personal view on it is that archetypes, human archetypes, are different than instinctual behavior. And that's where you're saying it's cross species, where I think an animal that's protecting its young, that shows a warrior type archetype, okay, is different than a human being becoming a warrior. I think they're more complicated, primarily because we do have a more complex way of whatever it is. We could go on and on for hours with this, because they can get, you go into anthropology, you can go into all kinds of things about what these things mean. And I think one of the definitions that Jung gave about the archetypes was that he said it's like the archetype is the tire track in the dirt, and the presentation of the archetype was the water that fills that track. Which I think is similar to your analogy of the iron filings. And of course, regular people don't need to know this kind of thing.
I have something to say on that point, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's to better understand what we're talking about when we talk about archetypes, you can just think that archetypes are like instincts, and you can make up your own definition for this. This is what I would say, that archetypes are, for the average person to be able to use this idea, archetypes are like instincts, but they are innate within everyone. The access to them, at least, is within everyone, has access to these archetypes that are like instincts, but they're just more complex in what results from them. Now, you were saying that archetypes don't have meaning, but how you constellate the archetype creates the meaning. Is that what you were saying?
To you, but they don't carry innate meaning.
No, they don't. No, right. And that I agree with that.
And they're also value neutral, which is why they're dangerous.
Value neutral, what does that mean?
There's no such thing as a good or bad archetype.
Okay. There's no such thing really as good or bad either. I mean, if you want to, I think most people, though, are going to view the shadow side to the king as the tyrant as being bad.
Yeah, but so exactly right. But just because it's in the shadow, just because it's the disintegrated or bipolar, axes that you are sort of bounced back and forth on while you're in the process of integrating it. It doesn't mean that it's like inherently anything, right?
No, but that's absolutely true. I mean, but this is getting a bit philosophical, and that's great. I mean,
I wouldn't say it's philosophical. I think it's actually radically pragmatic.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. I mean, and this is Jung's whole point, is the minute that you start thinking of like the shadow as a problem, right? Let's say that like your capacity for being a tyrant, either internally or externally in your life. Yeah. If you start thinking of that as like, oh my God, this is a problem. I need to get away from this. You're doing exactly the opposite of what he said, because what he said is you need to understand the function of the tyrant, where it's coming from, what it's trying to achieve, right? And integrate it into the system. Because if you integrate coward and tyrant together, right? If you accept your capacity for cowardice and for tyranny and fold it back into the system, that's when you find the balance that creates the king in his fullness. But in order to do that, we have to not think of them as being evil, bad, of a problem. It's just that they're imbalanced, and they need to come back into balance, right?
Well, what's imbalance then? How would you describe imbalance? Would you describe non-integration and imbalance as a bad thing?
I would say out of balance is when it becomes unconscious, when it's being pushed out.
Describing what it is, though. Let's stick with good or bad. Is it a bad thing, or is it a good thing to be out of balance?
It's a bad thing to be out of balance.
Okay.
Right. No, even then, I take it back, because no, it's not. It's a human thing to be out of balance. This is what it. This is
okay. This is where this is good, though, because this is where we get into this idea of, if somebody comes into your office and says to you, "I want to kill myself,"
right,
or says to you, "Everything I do is shit. I hurt people. I go out and I beat people up or whatever, and I don't want to do that anymore." Okay, so that client is identifying his behavior or whatever as a bad thing. I don't want to beat people up anymore. I don't want to hurt my partner or whatever. Okay, so the in my view, and I think you would share this, the purpose of therapy is to integrate or to make conscious the system in him that believes that the behavior of being violent or whatever it is something that works for them, or is a choice that they make, whatever that might be. When that becomes conscious, then the choice will be something different, an integrated choice. But it more than likely will not include hurting somebody or beating them up or whatever it might be, because it's there. And this may be where we disagree, because I think there is a natural way that humans are supposed to function. And that becomes an integrated integrated, but not acted out because it's imbalance.
Yeah.
I mean, I may not be making a lot of sense with that, but I don't think it's natural. I mean, just to use these words, to murder people. I think it might be natural to kill people at certain times, but to murder them only because it gives you pleasure to murder them for no other practical reason. I don't think that's a natural human condition.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's a strange category, natural.
Yeah, we'll make up another word for it. Normal. I don't like the word normal at all.
But if you look at the warrior archetype, you're going to have its shadow the bipolar opposites of the masochist and the sadist, right? And recognizing that we have the capacity for sadistic and masochistic behaviors is the first step. This is Jung, right? To integrate the shadow, you have to recognize that you have one,
right?
And make peace with it. When you bring into conscious awareness these unconscious drives that are driving you, you can ask yourself a simple question: what is it like? What is it about being sadistic? What's the secondary gain? What are you trying to protect? Because generally speaking, what happens is that like your solution has become a problem. You're trying to protect something. You're just going about it driven by these unconscious drives, not quite aware of the fact that you're protecting against something that's not there, or you're protecting from it in a way that has like this shit ton of collateral damage. But you have to understand the function of it. And when you get into parts theory, it's even more sort of obvious. It's like, these parts, manager parts, exiles, that sort of interfere and sabotage you. Why? Because they're trying to protect something. When you can have a conversation with them in the imaginal realms and hear back from them what they're trying to protect, then you, from the function of sovereignty, right, the big S self, can put things in right balance, right? But so again, it's like really to say that the sadistic or the masochistic function within, or capabilities within the human experience are bad, is to
no. Wait a minute. Be careful with the word capabilities, and compared to the word function.
Okay.
Function to me, and maybe you didn't mean it this way, implies action. And I think that there are certain actions, not necessarily capabilities. I think we're capable of the whole gamut
Right.
the good and the bad, or whatever you want to call it, you know, the shadow or the this or whatever it might be. And the work is that, you know, and again, we may disagree with this, but I believe that a close to fully integrated person or individuated person will act a particular and behave a particular way that's relatively consistent.
Right.
Okay, in most things. And that consistence is the propagation of love and care for others, empathy, blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on and on with the list of what I think an integrated person would be. I could be wrong. Okay, but that integrated or that individuated person still has within them the capability of being as wicked and as ugly as possible.
Right.
And if they're individuated, they're conscious of that.
Right.
They're aware of it, or whatever word you want to use. So it's more that the work is to become as conscious of the myriad faces that the human being is capable of expressing. And that's not even fully accurate, but I think that's most of what the work would be. At least this is my view. I mean, I
think you're looking for what Edinger was describing as the ego self access here, right?
Yeah.
The alignment is there, and by that, Christ, I'm going to try and explain it. So ego self access being that the ego, what's making the decisions is alignment with your higher self, right? Which is in balance with your I don't know, help me out here. The higher self, it's when you're you can think of it in a transpersonal term. I think I'm trying to secularize this, but I don't think you can, because your higher self is going to have to be something that's bigger than you, right? Your capacity to constellate the divine and be in alignment with the divine, which means that your actions are geared toward what creates balance for the collective, right? And so it's humbling and relativizing the ego, right? It means that the ego is now in service of something bigger than itself. And I think I found my way out of my little tangle here, because I think even if you don't want to make it transpersonal, you can make it some concept in your mind of the ultimate sort of potential that you have as a human being. And I think maybe that's the humanistic approach, is to say, even whether or not you believe in God, it's like you actualizing your highest potential. Within the system.
Right.
Which of course runs into all kinds of trouble, because then it's not relativized. And then you get, Q Nietzsche, who's like, okay, well, if you're going to go that route, good luck, because now you're going to be making it up as you go. And then it's going to naturally fall back into ego.
Yeah. Well, obviously the language is a real limitation. The words that we're using, good, bad, balance, imbalance, even conscious, unconscious. I mean, we can define those words in certain contexts, but and I think that's where a lot of the conflict comes in, and talking about these kinds of things is that there's not a clear definition. Once you get into good and bad and moral and immoral and higher self and lower self or whatever, you run into this. I very often just feel like saying there is no higher self, there is no good, there is no bad, there is no morality, and in a sense there isn't. I mean, you could say, and this is also could run into trouble, you could say that the ultimate foundation of divinity and the most advanced we can be in our understanding of ourselves and our behavior is love. Okay, well, what is that? What exactly is that? But that you can say, and people will go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. My therapist, who has written quite a few wonderful books. His name is Adam Crabtree, and look him up. One of his books is Evolutionary Love. I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to everybody else. Evolutionary Love, and the basic tenet he presents there is that there's two kinds of love. There is agape love, which is the love that's only for the benefit of the object being loved. It's like you will sacrifice yourself for it. You don't want anything in return. And then the other love is eros love, which is the love that you love something in order to receive the love back. And he said for human beings, you've got to have a balance of the two, as long as the eros love isn't stronger than the agape love. And as a human being, because we're material creatures and, we have a reason to be in love because we want to be loved back and all of that, you have to have the two. And when you separate them, then you get into this concept of the higher self, of agape love, the Christ love, this love that I give you, this love of myself with nothing expected in return. And I don't think human beings, like he says, can function with only agape love. I think that's a spiritual realm. That's a transcendent realm. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does. Yeah. And I mean, just to go back and sort of answer a question that you didn't ask. I mean, I think it's kind of like our job to take these theoretical things and make them practical. How can we take these and work with them in a way that brings about healing and transformation, ultimately liberation? And so that's again where it's always radically pragmatic. And I think people can you can get very lost in like belief. Pragmatism is like it's to me, having studied a lot of the esoteric traditions and philosophy, it's a kind of like ultimate conclusion. It's like, I believe in what works. Do I like we were saying this earlier, you and I, before we got on the air, about like whether or not it's like, do you believe in God? Well, I mean, I act accordingly and my life gets better. That's radical pragmatism, right? So
yeah, but like, define better and define works. I mean, can you do that? I don't think any of us can do that. What does it mean when you say this works? What you have a goal in mind? What? I'm sorry.
It reduces suffering, or your perception of suffering.
So it reduces suffering. So suffering isn't a part of the human experience that actually makes you a more individuated person to experience suffering.
Yeah, I mean, you can split hairs and say that it sort of changes the relationship to suffering, but ultimately what we're looking for here is a kind of relationship toward our suffering that generally looks like an alleviation of it, in order for us to be free enough to function. Right.
Certainly, your clients, all my clients, most of them, there's a few that are not.
Right.
All they want when they come to therapy is relieving suffering.
Blessed be.
Whether it be depression, anxiety, relationships, whatever. That's all they want.
Right.
And I don't blame them.
Suffering may not be so overwhelming that it's limiting my capacity to experience the joy that's right in front of me that I can see but I can't taste.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And a radical pragmatic approach toward healing and ultimately liberation is not what you believe, not what's real, not what's true, not what's provable, not what's not provable. It's whatever gets you there, whether it be an idea or the body or a ceremony or a symbol, whatever, right? And I think it's like, it kind of behooves practitioners to really be in that place, to drop dogma. It doesn't matter how we get to the place, as long as we get there. And I think if the human experience, the history of the human experience has told us anything, is there's an infinite number of ways to get to the same fucking place.
Yeah. And
if we drop the dogma and just see whatever gets you there, if I start talking to my client about perinatal trauma, and they're like, oh, I don't get it, man. This doesn't make any sense to me. How can my birthing experience be such an imprint on me? I don't get it. It's not moving toward an alleviation of suffering. And so be it.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So we move on to something else. And there's something within that understanding that does make sense, and let's go down that line. And as long as we can untether ourselves from ideology and theory, and I mean, this is where I think so much goes wrong. People get they get into these camps. When you start working with someone who does IFS therapy, it's like everything is seen through the realm of IFS. And everything is understood in that realm. I mean, you can say that. I mean, I'm picking on IFS. You could, whatever it may be. But my training was that you use the tools that work, right? And it's ultimately eclectic. And if there is something that I can say to you that sounds like a kind of understanding of parts within the personal unconscious that helps to alleviate your suffering, bring you awareness, and alleviate that, well, then great, blessed be. Who cares if it's right?
Okay, this is going. I'm going to ask you something. It's really going off, and we have to stop anyway.
Yeah.
But just curious if you have a quick response to this. If you had a client that came in your office who was a pedophile, and a really nasty one, like really hurt children through a sexual predator response, and he came in the office and he said, you know what, I do this to kids, and da 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 da, and I want to feel better about what I do. I feel really badly that I hurt these kids this way. And I don't want to stop doing it. I just don't want to feel bad about it anymore. I don't want to suffer through feeling like I'm doing something bad. What would work for that client?
Prison.
Good answer. Actually,
if a client came to me and said that they were
yeah.
actively sexually abusing children,
right.
I would say, bear with me a second, I need to go to the washroom, and I would call the RCMP.
That was a too extreme example. Okay, and you know what?
In their time, I might actually entertain the possibility that if they felt legitimate remorse, that they could, I would see them and work through understanding what happened that drove them to cause such.
Of course. Yeah. I think I was trying. I didn't succeed, but I was trying to find a place where this idea of we do what works as defined by who, and is it defined by the client? Work with me so that it works. That do what you need to do so that this will work for me, or is it defined by you, or is it defined by a higher power? Because what your answer to that is exactly right. It's like, this is not something that I am going to be able to handle for you. What works for the community, what works for me personally, is to see you punished for what you do.
For your own
now,
sake. For his sake.
For his sake. Right. I agree.
Not just for the victims, but for his own sake.
I agree. I agree with that. I think there's a time and place for the culture to determine this is not something we are going to put up with, and we are going to do what we need to do in this situation for your own good. They don't think of it. The culture doesn't think of it that way. But psychologically and spiritually, it's like you need to go through this process. So if you are this kind of person.
And what determines that, I would say, is that ego self-access, the extent to which you're being driven by the divine. Because it's not the divine, because it has to be inflected through you, right? You're not a Muhammad. You don't have a direct line. You're not Christ, right?
Right.
So to the extent that you have cultivated, the practitioner has cultivated within themselves a sufficient amount of ego self-access, they can function within an ethical framework and an ethic that is related to the collective good, at a profound level.
Right.
But ultimately, it's still going to be my call, because whether or not as the clinician, right? Because what I think of as being acceptable and what another practitioner feels is acceptable is a different thing. I mean, you're giving a very sort of radical example. You're giving most radical one. What's interesting though is like, it gets even more kind of interesting when you peel back and you go like, well, what if you had a client that expressed those inclinations but hadn't acted upon them? And then what if they said that they didn't feel any remorse about the inclination because they hadn't acted upon it? That's when things get really
well. That's really where we as part of the community can function as a therapist in that scenario. I don't think, and this is getting too deep into this, but I don't think we can function as a therapist in the community with someone who's acting that out. That we have to turn that over to the system that is, they're going to destroy him, but that's what he needs, in order to see his maker or whatever, if he's religious at all. I mean, he needs to reconcile that through that system. Which includes incarceration or execution or whatever it might be, depending on what it is that we're talking about, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would say that this comes right back to being driven by, unconscious drives here, because what we don't want to be unconsciously driven by is an imbalance in which we believe from a place of that maternal non-judgmental approach that then we fall into, then all things are permitted, because then we lose the masculine containment and it all falls apart. Right. So you can comfort, like, with a sense of needing a non-judgmental attitude, but there are limits to non-judgment, right? And the limits are actually quite clearly defined within the ethical codes that that registered therapists work under, which is harm to self and others. If I believe that me maintaining confidentiality will then lead to you hurting yourself or someone else being hurt as a result, that's the line where you say, I can't do that for you.
Yeah, right. Well, from an ethical point of view.
For your own sake, and as much as the sake of the people who are being hurt.
Exactly. Now, I like the way you brought this back to the unconscious. And obviously, this topic is one that would take 200 of these sessions, if even that, to at least even begin to cover. The thing that we're going to wrap up now, but the thing that I would like people watching this to get is that there is an unconscious system that is formulated generally in a way that isn't really mature, usually. And because of that, it will have an influence on your behavior that is not the behavior that you would consciously choose to do. And it can have an influence on that and actually cause you, just like one of the early things you said was, you know, what's getting in my way? Why is this happening in my life? And generally it's usually, and I'm saying in very generalities, it's generally due to an unconscious system or unconscious whatever that's causing this. Now we can get into the archetypal parts of that and everything with the shadow. We could talk about that forever. So I said that, William, would you agree with that, or would you rather say it in another way? Like what would you want the people watching this to come away from is very concisely regarding the unconscious? Why is it important for everybody to understand that to this point, to this limit?
Okay, maybe I'll just double down on what I was saying before, which is it doesn't matter what it is or what you think it is or how you conceive of it or who said what. If the idea or some version of that idea works in service of your own liberation from suffering, then go with it. And don't get hung up on whether or not archetypes are collective or personal or whether or not they're trans, species or not. If the idea works, go with it. Because ultimately, when it comes to the psycho-spiritual and psycho-emotional liberation, I think my personal opinion is that we have to be driven by pragmatics. We cannot get bogged down into ideologies and theories and this kind of thing. And I think that would probably extend out into my political beliefs, in my deep suspicion of ideology.
Yeah,
to put it nicely.
Well, ideology is always a problem, in my opinion. Even the ones that are labeled good, will have problems in them. You have to be conscious of all of the nuance that any of these dogmatic ideas can create, or else you get caught up in them and you go the easy route, which essentially, well, this is what I believe, and I'm not looking at anything else.
Exactly. I mean, I love the fact that Robert Moore, author of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and one of my sort of great influences, he got his start deprogramming people who were in cults. Oh yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah. And it's weird because I mean, it's the ultimate extension of that is like deprogramming yourself from your own cult.
Right. It's exactly right. Yeah. Exactly. Very good. Okay, we'll stop here, and just to remind everybody that to please subscribe. That's very important for us if you like what we're doing, and please leave comments. And if you disagree, absolutely, we want to hear. In fact, we want to hear that more than anything, because that informs us and helps us learn more about what we're talking about. And subscribe, like, whatever. And if you need to reach me, go to my website or my email address that I already left. And, we had a little bit of technical stuff going on with this one. If you notice that and it bothered you, we're trying to fix it. So hopefully the next time around, it won't happen. But if you didn't notice it, great. Okay. And William, what would you like to say?
Yeah, feedback, pushback. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, so set me straight.
Yes, you do. No, that's nice to say. I don't think either one of us do. So anyhow, that's it.
Let us know how.
That's right. Good. And we will see you next time. So bye-bye.